All right, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. We are the Center for Career Development, and we're here with Marymount alumni George Eade representing Accenture. We're really excited to share this space with you and with George to hear his perspective on how he ended up where he is today in his career journey, as well as how Marymount assisted him in that process. This event is going to be moderated by our director, Joe Gebbe. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Joe, but I do have one note. I apologize. If you would put your name and student ID number in the chat, you can direct message me for that so that we can track your attendance here and make sure that this shows up on your MU Engage transcript as far as activities that you've attended. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe Gebbe. It's all yours.
Thank you so very much, Emily, and thank you, George, for being with us today. Everybody here thinks about consulting, and it's the hot word these days. But we see that you graduated in 2008. Could you talk a little bit about your career trajectory from 2008 here at Marymount to where you are today?
Yeah, so first of all, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it, and I'm very excited to be, talking to, the Accenture, sorry, the Marymount student body overall. So thank you for having me. So in terms of my my trajectory, so as you'd mentioned, I graduated in 2008 with a Bachelor of Business Administration and an emphasis in international business. Marymount at the time was called the Student Career and Internship Center, the CIC, right? That was really helping students find internships overall, figure out where they wanted to take their careers, hosting these kinds of conversations and all. And so I was definitely an active part in that because I really wanted to make sure that my internship when I was an undergrad was going to be something that reflected where I thought I wanted to be at the time overall. A little bit of background about myself. I am not an international student, but I am a Lebanese American citizen and grew up in Lebanon for part of my life and came for high school and college back to the US. And my personal goal was that I wanted to do something global. I wanted to join the Foreign Service at the time. I wanted to be part of the State Department and work in embassies, posts, and consulates overseas overall, right? So that was my objective at the time. And luckily for me, the CIC arranged a open interview day, if you will, with a representative of the State Department who was interested in bringing on interns at the State Department to help them out with some of their work there. So I definitely raised my hand there. The interview process was a really kind of a funny one. It turns out that the person interviewing me had actually served in Lebanon as a retired Foreign Service officer. So it helped kind of make that connection overall, and you'll hear me talk about connections throughout this conversation too. It's really not just about your skills, your education, your engagement activities and all, but also the connections that you build along the way too that are very, very important for you to manage there. So that was one connection, right? So I got my my internship at the State Department. This was my junior year at Marymount. I think it was my junior year. So I started working at the State Department. It was a really good opportunity because they offered, it was a paid internship. It counted towards years of retirement for the federal career service program, if you will. Got my 401k match, the overall, and it was really cool to just see like how is it to be in the real world, right? Overall. So fast forward 2 years, I kind of changed my mind a little bit. I'm like, I still want to do international work, but I didn't really want to work for the government. It just really didn't operate at the pace that I wanted it to. There was a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, as you might imagine. Still a very prestigious place to be, which that was a foot in the door for me to get my first taste of consulting, which I then applied for a job at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is located in our backyard, right? At Marymount's backyard, pretty much. And what got me in at Booz Allen was my experience at the State Department overall. When I was at the State Department, I was still a college student and got a security clearance from the State Department too, which was very attractive to Booz Allen. So neither of these two were, neither Booz Allen nor the State Department were organizations that I knew anyone or leveraged any like pulled any strings or anything like that. It was really, part of it I would say was maybe a matter of luck too, of having connected with someone, right? But it's really about how do you make those connections overall that really get your foot in the door there. So that security clearance was, in my opinion, a very strong lever that I had against others to be able to get that my foot in the door into consulting, especially because the way I applied for the job at Booz Allen was I was literally on my way to my internship at the State Department and saw a Metro advertisement that literally was clearedjobs.net, which was a recruiting event open to all professionals, like entry level to senior executives, to go to Crystal City at the Crystal City Marriott, I think it was, or something. And I just threw my resume there. I told them, people, I said, I haven't graduated yet. I'm going to graduate in a couple months, but I have a clearance and I'm interested in joining you. So I literally went to every booth around the room and kind of threw my name out there. So that's how I started in my career in consulting, was at Booz Allen. 4 years later, I decided to make a switch with Accenture, where I've been now for 9 years with Accenture.
Wow. That's great. And it seems like what you're saying is that you're always on, always networking, always keep a lookout for the next opportunity when you're even at a bus station. You never know what's hanging on the inside of the wall, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's important. Here at Marymount, we give everybody opportunities to meet employers, like you met employers as well in our career fairs and all of our events. So if students, do you encourage students to utilize the Career Service Center? Do you encourage them to utilize our services? Could you talk a little bit about how you utilize services of the Career Center of the Career Center, not just the career fair that day?
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't just going to the events, right? You can't just show up to the event. You've got to know how to have a conversation with someone, right? Which is not something that you're necessarily taught in a class, right? There might be some support and things like that, but that's where I think that the Career Center might be able to help give you some advice overall in terms of like, how do you make small talk? What's your 30-second elevator pitch, right? So actually the Boston is a new building, so I don't even know what floor you guys are on, but it used to be, I think, the 3rd floor or something. But like, second floor now. Okay, well, so it's a shorter elevator pitch, but literally, like, just think about like, if you're in an elevator with someone, what are you going to tell them about who you are, what you've done, what can you do for others, and where do you want to go overall too? I think that it's very important for you to be able to articulate that, because that really shows, number one, that you have a plan, that you have an objective, that you're able to hold conversations with people, and practicing that. So the Career and Internship Center actually helped me with that, right? In terms of like, hey, what's the pitch? What's your story? Where have you done? Where do you want to go? They've also held resume building workshops overall, which I jumped in for, and had one-on-one sessions with someone at the CIC at the time, right? To help me, build my resume overall based on my experiences, which at the time when I was at the State Department, before I joined the State Department, it was very limited, right? I think probably a lot of you on the call might also feel like, well, I have zero experience, and all these jobs are asking for like 5 years of experience. 5 years of experience doesn't necessarily mean like 5 years of like consulting experience per se. Think about what are some of the transferable skills that you could do, right? So you joined a consulting group, you have registered for X, Y, and Z classes, you have done some work elsewhere, whatever it might be. Like, to me, when I turned 16 years old, my birthday present to myself was to apply for a job, and my mom's rule was, you can go wherever you want as long as number one is legal, number two, I don't need to drive you to work, right? So I started walking from where I lived in Tyson's Corner, walked down Route 7, and applied for a job at every single one of the stores until I said, you know what, this is going to be too much for me to walk, I'm going to stop there. At the time, it was Sports Authority. They're the business now. They're the ones who said, hey, we'll hire you. So I had that little bit of experience that I was able to do when I was still in high school. Get a little bit of experience, have some cashiering experience, for example, to say, hey, I'm trusted with money. That you can trust me potentially with a security clearance, for example, right? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about like leverageable, transferable skills, and how the Career and Internship Center also helped me kind of get my little bit of experience at the time to the next level and into that sort of, you know, real world that I'm sure you've been hearing about. So.
Absolutely. And I think that if, you know, students can articulate their experience, and no matter if it's at a Starbucks or a sports authority, and they can really bring those skills into whatever job they get, I think that is a benefit for them. So that they should always, you know, keep a list of what they're learning at their jobs, their internships, in classes. But back to the hot question, right? I see a lot of students coming into my office, and I say to them, you know, so what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do? And students will look at me and go, I want to be a consultant. And then, you know, I'd say, well, what is a consultant? And a lot of students, you know, they have very creative answers to that question. You know, in your mind, working at all these, you know, Booz Allen Hamilton and Accenture, what is consulting? What is consulting really?
Yeah, so I think it really depends. And so if someone tells me they want to be a consultant, I've heard the term consultant being used everywhere, from retailers, like literally like clothing stores. They're like, I'm a sales consultant. Yeah, you are. You're like helping, advising people if they look good in a dress or not. But yes, that's right. You know, you can be a technology consultant, for example, which starts lining a little bit more with what Accenture does, part of what Accenture does, where like you're helping companies figure out like their entire like IT like infrastructure overall, like how are they going to manage all of their systems overall, right? And that's kind of a little bit of the work that I do. You also have strategy and management consulting, which is where I sit, which is like, what is the organization going to look like in the future? So, for example, if there's a company that wants to that is thinking about buying out another one, right? So let's say I'm just trying to think of a merger that recently happened that's making the news. Think about like Sprint and T-Mobile, for example, right? So that happened a couple years ago, right? So Accenture helps out with these kinds of companies figure out like, okay, if you have two different companies that want to come together, like it's not just a matter of like all of their cell phone towers are going to be one. No, there might be some that like you don't even need anymore because they might be sitting like a foot apart from each other, right? So you can kind of reduce costs, and that's all a little bit of like what I do. Overall, it's help them figure out what it might mean, and it's not just cell phone towers; it could literally be anything. And so it's pretty far-reaching overall, which honestly, that's part of the reason why I wanted to go into consulting too, because my answer, like had you asked me, Joe, like what do I want to do, I would have told you I want to travel the world, I want to do international work. It doesn't matter what I do, I want to do it, right? And so I didn't know, right? And I'm in consulting like 14 years later. I probably still don't know if I'm still in consulting, but I've made a career out of it as well. But part of it is because there's a continuous learning of new just functions, things that run in businesses that I didn't even know existed. But my niche, what I've carved out for myself, is that I was very interested in the human element of businesses. So if you think about like industrial psychology, for example, where like how are people motivated to work, right? How do you get people motivated to do their jobs in today's world of like remote working, right? Some of you might have parents, or some of you might be working remotely, where like we're on a Zoom call now, right? You know, how does a business change? How do you keep people engaged? Where it's like they've got kids and dogs and neighbors and whatever else happening overall, and they're just like, I just want to like live my life, where I just want to do my work, and I can't have face-to-face interaction. And that's kind of where I specialize and I focus my time on. But the field of experiences might be very different too. Like my first project was with electric grid setup, for example, right? I didn't even know that that was much of a thing, right? I had another project that was in the coffee business, actually, right? So I think you're Starbucks of the world, if you will, in terms of like how do they operate differently? You know, the project I'm on now is around cell and gene therapy, which is a very niche, very scientific field around different ways of curing cancer. And so the work is very, very different, but to me, it's all about like the people who make the product happen. That's where I'm at. But you know, so what is consulting? I mean, consulting is the act of advising clients on very tough decisions or in very tough moments that they're in, whether they're about to go bankrupt, whether they're about to be bought out, or want to buy other companies out, or want to expand out, or you know, are going to lay off thousands of people. Like that's usually where consultants come in, and they help the client solve through these problems overall. And it's not a matter of like, oh, I think like this is what you need to do. No, there's a lot of data behind it. There's a lot of macro and microeconomic like implications and studies, if you will, that need to be conducted on the back end before we can come to a client and say, hey, you're about to make a $50 billion mistake. Don't do this, right? Or hey, this is really gonna like open up your world into a whole new area that like you are completely unfamiliar with, or whatever it might be. That's kind of what a consultant does is advise people when times are not normal for our clients.
Nice. And all I want is a part of that $50 billion. So
yeah, right. Exactly. I wish I had that.
right. Our students hear, all these different names, right? Accenture, Bain, Price Waterhouse, Deloitte, whatever. What is the difference between these types of organizations?
Yeah, great question. I think they're it's funny, and this is a very typical consultant answer. It depends, right? And this is good because so you might hear that a lot too in the world of consulting, but it really does. Where generally speaking in the industry, just like cars have a reputation, right? To me, if I think about a Honda or a Toyota, I'm like, you can drive this thing through the ground and it'll still drive. Like I've seen cars like, right. Or you could have, and those are affordable cars, dependable cars, reliable cars, right? You just stereotyping, right? You've got, Porsche, Lamborghini, whatever it is, like fantastic, beautiful cars and everything. Can you even go over a speed bump on those? You probably will break your car if you go through a big enough pothole, right? So not practical, very like fast and sexy and everything, right? And so consulting is a little bit like that too, where if you were trying to liken it, even in terms of like, some consultancies are known for something and might not be the right choice for some other things. So historically speaking, the consultancies really differentiated themselves by the type of work that they did. So Accenture really grew up, their bread and butter was technology, large scale like technology implementation. So like running the gamut on how they're going to like do all their IT infrastructure, for example, or even providing outsourcing services. So we're a company of 600,000+ people. There are countries that have fewer people, citizens than like Accenture. So we do a lot of outsourcing services. A lot of our work is actually based in India and the Philippines. But we've really transformed ourselves where we provide an overall end-to-end service where we do a lot of strategy work, a lot of management consulting work, which historically Bain, McKinsey, and Boston Consulting Group have been really the kings of that, if you will, in terms of like they just do strategy, but they don't do like the execution of it. And so Accenture has really started to expand their horizon where they've been focused. They're giving Bain, BCG, and McKinsey a run for their money on their strategy work too, because we have really fantastic strategy practice too. But we also provide the end-to-end services, and Accenture is not the only one doing that. All of the other consultancies are also doing that. Where like Deloitte, PwC, and the other ones are also. Everyone's catching up to this, so the differentiation becomes a little bit harder. And I think that there's this maybe an old school of thought still that still thinks about, oh well, Accenture is technology. I didn't realize you did strategy. And I oftentimes have client conversations where I'm like, yep, we used to do that 20 years ago. We've actually changed and we've done all this awesome work. And here's where we might beat out the competition.
Interesting. And with all these different firms, different, I guess things that you can pinpoint like information technology, higher education, whatever they're doing, these different consultancy firms that they specialize in. I hear a lot of, do you work in the public side or the private side?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does that really mean? And like, what do you prefer?
Yeah. So it basically, it's what 15 years ago, 15 years ago or so, the federal government made it such that government contracts. So for example, like your client, if you're in the public side, that means that you're working usually for the federal, local, or state government, or sometimes some NGOs, non-government organizations like the World Bank, for example, or the IMF, right? And that's the type of work that you do. You focus on that sort of client group. You might be like Department of Defense, it might be State Department, it might be the CIA, it might be Department of the Treasury, whoever it is, like, or it might be California state governments or, you know, Fairfax County government, right? It could be any of that that's considered typically public sector. And then private sector is really everything else. So you're you know, who's around Marymount, Nestle, Marriott, Hilton, you know, that like those are private sector for-profit companies that have oftentimes are publicly traded companies that report out to shareholders. So that's the public and private difference, and your client base is usually one or the other. Some consultancies do a little bit of both. Accenture is one of the consultancies that does both. But the federal government years ago had made it such that the federal consulting work had to have some extra like requirements, if you will.
Layers.
A lot of the work, a lot of the work had to be done in the U.S. A lot of work had to be done by U.S. citizens, especially ones that like involve like the intelligence community or anything that's, you know, requires security clearances, and that they had to be based in the U.S. too. And so ultimately, what happened for like Accenture, Deloitte, and others is like these are global companies that are not like that are not entirely based in the U.S. overall, right? So our global headquarters is actually in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
Primarily, I would say probably for tax purposes. And so as a result, what a lot of these companies did was create a subsidiary, which basically means a company within a company that is based in the US, that is run by the US. Everything is separated, if you will. And that as a result, there's people who focus on federal and people who focus on like commercial private sector consulting. So that's what it means. And that's kind of a little bit of why oftentimes you'll see a little bit of both. And it's funny because so I live in Los Angeles now. I used to live in Washington D.C. and then federal and commercial had this very big, like, you know, curtain, if you will, between the two. And it used to be actually, so Accenture is located on 1000 North Glebe Road.
Right next door.
Was it 800? Yeah,
right
yeah, it's 1000 or 800. I always get the Boston campus and the other one confused. But literally right next door. And the floors are actually separated. Like a commercial person doesn't have access to the levels and the federal side and vice versa. So, you know, there are those like security requirements that are put in place. But where I'm going with this overall is that like DC is very unique in the sense where you have that choice of doing either one overall, right? It's a lot less common in Los Angeles. Like, for example, a lot of my colleagues based in LA are like, I didn't even know we had a federal service. I don't even know what that means. Like, explain this to me, right? Because it's like you don't really need to interact with the other side, if you will, typically. So
nice, yeah. And you know, our students are looking forward, you know, to the future. You know, we just got a new group of first years coming in. You know, and what they want to say is, listen, I want to be a consultant. I want to be a consultant. What qualifications do I need? What certifications do I need? You know, if I have an MBA as opposed to, you know, an MFA, can I be a consultant? You know, when looking at qualifications of consultant, is there a specific set of qualifications, educational, hard skills, soft skills, things people should start developing even in first or second year in college?
Yeah, there isn't a set formats, at least for Accenture, right? There isn't a set format where like we look for people who have engineering degrees or MBAs or whatever, right? And or from a top 10 school or things like that. Some other consultancies traditionally, and I think they've also shifted, like Bain, McKinsey, and Boston Consulting Group, for example, I think they required you to get an MBA to move to the next level. You could come in as an undergrad. Oftentimes you'd be hired from an engineering school and then move into consulting 4 or 5 years and then go into like a top 10 B school and then continue your career on. That's like the traditional method of consulting that you think of. Accenture, and I think a lot of even maybe BCG, Bain, and McKinsey have also shifted to this, and you know, Deloitte and Pricewaterhouse, all of them have really shifted where your education matters, your foundational education matters, but the market evolves and revolves so quickly that, like, you know, I read these crazy statistics about an MBA, the relevance, you know, sorry, I'm Joe, I'm just, you know, saying this, right? an MBA, right, used to be like you could have an MBA and it would serve you well in terms of what you've learned in B school for like your entire career.
Exactly.
The market has shifted so much, has transformed itself so much that an MBA is good for a couple years, right? And a lot of what you've learned might not be relevant. I mean, to me, I remember, and you guys, I don't even know if you guys were born for this, but I was at Marymount when Facebook got started, right? And Facebook was only open to college students, right? Facebook was just this random place where you put random facts about yourself, about what music you liked, whatever else it was. And now you hear about like how Facebook has not just Facebook, but I mean, primarily Facebook, and has really created this sort of like social media, like way of life, whether it's like, whatever you're sharing, whatever you're buying, whatever you're doing. And all of this has like, there's a reason why Facebook is like so profitable, like so valuable in terms of like their market cap, is like, it has really transformed, it really has transformed the world. I mean, like, just think about like you're clicking likes on something, whatever it is. Guess what? You have advertisements that come up, right? That are about like targeted to you and all that. From a business perspective, that's a gold mine, right? And so that, like, nobody in my class, there's no, even if you, I mean, maybe if you like, nobody at Marymount was talking about like, oh, social media is going to completely transform the way you're doing business. No one knew that, right? And so my point is like, it evolves constantly. And so, Joe, your simple question about like what does it take? It's so think about that, as you're going to it, right? I've worked with people at Booz Allen and at Accenture who had degrees in theology, right? Who went into consulting, right? And so it's about you being able to, get an undergraduate degree, but also be able to like think critically about problems, which kind of goes into what you might have heard, the case study interview, for example, in consulting, which is a very typical thing that we do. We do it at Accenture for some positions, where we look at how people break down problems and situations overall to come up with solutions, right? And so that's where I think it's really, that's one of the things that is very important that I hope Marymount, or I hope that we would do more of, is like practicing case interviews, looking at like what does that typically look like, and getting people to think a little bit beyond just the traditional textbook. Have the conversations, like I said, when you talk about the elevator pitch overall, what that means, but also look at problems, think about problems a little bit differently, for how you might solve for those too. So I think in consulting, I've always said like 80% of what I do is learn. So whether it's like cell therapy, like I talked about, or electric meters, like there's always a lot of learning, a desire to learn, and a desire to give back also. Those are things that we look for when we screen or have interviews with people.
Great. It seems like it's a constant learning thing. Here at Marymount, we talked a little bit about being competitive, and your MBA is only good for a couple of years, or your BA is only good for a couple of years. Marymount, we do have our internship requirement here. Usually the internship, which gives our students a really a good competitive edge against other schools. My question though is, a lot of our departments here only have the one internship built into their 4-year curriculum.
Yep.
Do you encourage multiple internships? When should students start looking at internships to try to make themselves a little bit more competitive? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think an internship, like the Marymount internship, is a check the box. That's a minimum thing that you need to do to be able to walk on stage and like shake the hand of the president. That's it, right? You cannot, like, don't expect to be at like this dream job of yours on day one with one internship, right? Especially if your internship was completely unrelated to like what you actually want to do or where you want to go to. So think about what is your trajectory? Where do you want to go? You don't need to have all the answers, right? I don't have all the answers to where I want to go next, right? I don't even know what I want to do next week. But generally speaking, like I have my objectives set where it's like, I want, like, to me, like I said, when I was at Marymount, I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to work in the foreign service. And beyond that, I didn't really care, didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I know that meant that I needed to get my foot in the State Departments, because that's what the foreign service does, right? And so so think about your internship. Like for me, for example, if I was, since I was an international business student, I did not want to go into doing an internship at Capital One. Like I could have, and I probably could have done well, and I probably could have done something international, but like to me, it was like, finance, I'm not really interested. I'm more interested in like the international business aspect of it, right? So think about, where is your internship going to lead you next? What will you put on your resume that will help you go to where you would want to go next? So your internship should be stepping stones. And with that said, Joe, like it's not just one and done. Like continuously do your internship, right? If you can extend yourself on an internship beyond one semester, fantastic, right? Do it, right? Even if it's at the same place, if you are growing your career at a place, guess what? They like you. Guess what? They probably want to hire you, right? So that's great. I think overall, right now, the job market is so much in favor of like hiring people right now. So I think it's a really good time to find an internship, because people are struggling to find talent, right? Yesterday I was at the airport, and half the stores were closed in the middle of the day, and I was wondering why. It's because they don't have people, right? So I'm not saying like go to Chick-fil-A and get that job and call that an internship. I mean, unless if you want to go into restaurant business and all, maybe we can talk offline about like, does that make sense or not? But so there are internships. If there are jobs, there are going to be internships available, right? Take advantage of them, grow from there, extend yourself if you can, find another internship overall, right? And that's again what I was doing. My 16th birthday consisted of me like applying for jobs, right? You don't need to wait until your junior, senior year to do an internship to get credit for it necessarily. You can go to Joe and say, Joe, I've done X, Y, and Z things already. These should count as my internship, which it might or might not, probably not, but like you have this other one that you do at your 300-400 levels where you can say, hey, this is going to be my internship. I'm going to continue in this trajectory. The last point I wanted to make about that too, my experience at the State Department was I got did my internship credits. The State Department was like, yep, that's fine, that's great, but like we're interested in like growing you. And so I ended up getting a promotion while I was still at Marymount's at the State Department, and got a job offer, full-time employment at the State Department, right? I kindly declined because Booz Allen snatched me up, paid me twice as much as what the State Department would have, right? So so that's if you the earlier, it's like investments, right? So the earlier you start, right, typically like your investment will grow, right? So start early, fail fast, that's okay, right? Learn from your mistakes, go somewhere else, take a different direction if you wanted to do something else.
Absolutely. And, we're seeing a lot of the employers too, especially the larger employers, start with, sophomore internship programs. So, students shouldn't say, listen, it's just a senior thing. It's not just a senior thing. When you walk on the campus first year, you start really thinking about what you should be doing the next few years. 65% of employers expect two or more internships these days.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, be competitive. Be competitive.
Yeah. So I'll tell you also what I did. So I was working part-time at the Sports Authority, and did a lot of jobs on campus. I worked in the IT, in the computer labs. I worked in the computer labs. I worked in the admissions office. I was the VP of the International Student Club. I was an active member of the SIFE group, Students in Free Enterprise, which is I think it's still there. And I worked at the State Department too. All in all, I was working about 60 hours a week, and I was a full-time student. It was exhausting. I won't lie. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that. Worked so much, and also taken the being a full-time student. But what I did my freshman and sophomore year, I pretty much front-loaded my classes in terms of like, let me try to just max out and get all these required classes out of the way, so that I can have a little bit more flexibility, which allowed me for my junior and senior year for all 4 semesters to take 12 credits, which was the minimum to be a full-time student, and also be able to do what I wanted to do, which was working in my internship, which became a part-time job. So I had classes 3 days a week, and with those 12 credits, and then I had 2 full days of working at the State Department. At the same time, I was also able to do a study abroad my senior year.
Busy.
Taking 12 credits. Yeah, it was very busy, but like, to me, it's like I started early, where it was like, let me just like try to do as much as I can my first 2 years. And then I was able to do a study abroad, which was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Just take 12 credits when I was studying abroad in Paris. My classes were Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Guess what I did? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I traveled everywhere, right? And it was great. So yeah, it was just because, again, that sort of upfront investment that I made in myself.
And I think these are all building blocks to get, again, to build your resume and all your skills up and have things to talk about when you do interview at places like Accenture.
Yep.
And you know, talking about places like Accenture and interviewing, you know, I know that we were going to move into the whole idea of what Accenture is really looking for in a candidate. You know, what do our students have to bring to the table, and how to apply? Could you go through that a little bit for our students?
Yeah, so for the application at Accenture, if you are an undergrad and don't have like years of experience where you were like a full-time employee somewhere, you know, which means something related to consulting or in the field of business, and I don't mean like, you know, retail store or things like that, but like just kind of like you work in an office environment or things like that, that you can go to, so either one, you should go to careers.accenture.com. Okay. And you can see from there, you have an experience hire portal, you have a college, you know, upcoming like graduates for undergrad and graduate program overall, where you can see what are all of the deadlines, the programs that are available, internships that are available also at Accenture, which I think are paid, by the way. And right, and oftentimes also go to potential for full-time employment. So literally all the interns that I've brought onto my project, but also the internship program at Accenture is one where oftentimes you will be facing the client, right? So we had some instances where our interns were usually the internship program was usually happening in the middle of summer, not during a semester. Where we had our interns go to the client site. Some of them were traveling, some of them were local, that they were like, hey, I'm just going to go to this client, whatever it might be, and get a taste for consulting, be there with the team, help the team out with whatever needed to be done. In some cases, you know, I felt comfortable enough where some of my interns, I said, hey, you should have a client conversation and you should be presenting this. I don't need to be the one, the talking head. I think you did the work, you should present it, right? Not everyone's going to be like that, I will tell you. But, you know, that's you know, kind of what the internship experience might look like. And every time that I bring an intern on, I get a call from HR saying, hey, would you hire this person? Should we make this person an offer? Right. That is something that Accenture looks at, is for, you know, potential, you know, hiring upon graduation. So in summary, careers.accenture.com is your first place to go. Second place to go, you know, reach out to me as well. You know, Joe, you know, feel free to share my contact info as well. I'm happy to, you know, entertain, you know, conversations or, you know, anything that any help that anyone needs. So, but my ask of you, do your homework. Don't just say, hey, I need a job or I need to do an internship. Can you help me fill out this internship application? Or I can help you fill out that internship application. But if I see like you haven't completed the first name, and I'm going to assume you don't know your first name, like that's something that like we need to have a discussion about, that you're not showing in discipline and proactivity. You will not be successful at Accenture. You will not be successful in consulting. You got to show the determination that like you want to grow, you want to succeed, and that you've done the homework. You've figured out like how the portal works and like started that process.
And you know, for your application too, for Accenture, can you tell me a little bit about how important it really is to be accurate when you fill you know, the application out, your cover letter, resume, and how really do hiring managers actually utilize them, resumes and cover letters? Do they read them? So is it like the difference between you and another candidate?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so essentially the resume, so how accurate do you have to be? You have to be 100% truthful, right? You know, I think you can be upfront and say, I don't have X, Y, and Z experience, but I have A, B, and C that is translatable, and here's why it's translatable, right? So to me, like I said, I was a cashier at the Sports Authority. I had, you know, $2,000 in my till. I could have easily pocketed it and run away. But no, I didn't. I counted my money before and then in my shift, and I said, look, State Department, you can trust me with like national security documents because this is something that I'm working towards, right? So, you know, be upfront about like what it is that you have, showcase that, see how it might be translatable, and so don't you know, don't lie on your resume, right? That will be you. It's never good to do that, and someone will find out eventually, right? So the resumes are absolutely must-haves overall to be considered for to get anything. th- how it's used overall, don't quote me on this, but I think overall there might be some like machine algorithm that looks for some keywords based on the job description. And also my hint to you is look at the job description. What do they look for? Make sure that you are like ticking tight in terms of like, yes, you have all the minimum required skills that are there, and a few of the desired skills overall. Those are important to have on your resume that you described those. So every resume, in my opinion, should be built and edited to match the job that you're applying for, right? And I'm not saying like, hey, you have your, I mean, you could say I have my dentist want to be like dental hygienist resume, and then I have my consultant resume, and then I have my like statistician resume. Like, yes, you should actually, based on the experiences that you have, and you have to build them for that purpose. So it is time consuming, right? And it's like, how am I going to do this with 50 different things and that I have going on? Yeah, it's again the investment in your time. The cover letter is a nice to have, I will say. The resume, so the recruiters look at the resume as well as the machine, if you will, right? And then I get the resume as well before I go into an interview panel and interview a candidate and say, you got this person, hey, this person went to Marymount. Great, let me talk to them about Marymount. How's Marymount doing? Guess what? I'm connecting, I'm networking with someone. That's a good foot in the door already, to have something in common with your interviewer that you might have. So think about that when it comes to the resume build. The cover letter, as I said, is a nice to have. I don't think there's an expectation for cover letters, but I think it really adds another level of dimension on a couple different fronts. Number one, your creative writing skills. So if you can tell a good story in a cover letter that is engaging, of like, hey, I am passionate about this because of my personal experience, like that is great. Like you're like something that doesn't necessarily get conveyed in your resume. Like make a reference to your resume saying, hey, as conveyed in my resume, I have all these skills. Great, check. But also I have these other things that are not necessarily skills. And to me, what I often do is I think about like my experience living overseas, growing up in Lebanon and the US, speaking multiple languages. Speaking multiple languages goes in your resume, but like just kind of talking about like how I as a human capital consultant, which basically means like taking care of people, grew up in a multicultural household. I have unique experiences of understanding nuances between different cultures. You can't really put that in a resume, but you can tell a story about that, right? And that's something that I would put in my cover letter. So think a little bit about what is that extra level of dimension that you're going to put into your cover letter that you would want to convey in there. And it's a nice to have. I think it adds a nice layer, but it's not a requirement though.
I think though, when it comes to between you and another candidate, I think that if the cover letter is done well and is really persuasive, do you agree that that could really set you apart from the other candidate that might have the exact same qualifications?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely could.
Awesome. So we're getting closer to the end of the hour. Just wanted to give you the opportunity to say one last thing, one last piece of advice before we go to some student questions.
It's your life. It's your career. I think maybe I'm going to make a wild assumption. I'm going to say a good chunk of you probably were told, hey, you should go to school. Hey, you should do well. Hey, you should do this. Hey, you should do that. Hey, you should do your resume. Hey, you should do your cover letter. Hey, you should do an application for an internship. At that point in time, like the training wheels go off. Like literally, like the training wheels go off definitely at graduation when you're like just jump into the real world, right? Unless you have a trust fund and everything, great. Whichever you, but if not, but if not, my point is like the training wheels don't necessarily go off at graduation. Like now's the time for you to start. Like, how do you learn how to ride a bike, right? It's like you're on your training wheels, you're biking, your parent is like holding you, and then the wheels go off, your parent's holding you, and then you're starting biking and your parent lets go of you and you don't realize that they've let go and you're biking. That's what it's like in the real world too. And guess what? To me, when I learned how to bike and I realized my parents like weren't holding me, what's the first thing I fell, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, and that's okay, right? And what is your next step? You're going to get up and you're going to bike again, and then you're going to like just be a mountain biker or a racing bike, whatever. My point being is like, you're in this point in your life where you can choose where you want to go, and you might not have the answers to everything, and that's okay, but like start somewhere, and start somewhere that you think will take you where you want to go next. And if you don't know where you want to go, that's okay, but think about where is it that you could go with said job, right? Said internship, said the major that you're doing, right?
And I think too, back to your point, your time at Marymount is really a time to explore, to make sure you like things, try different things out, try different internships at different organizations, see what you like. Because once you graduate, the expectations go double, triple. So it's better to do it now. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, George. And we have a few questions from our audience. The first question from one of our students is, what options do international students have at Accenture job-wise?
That's a very good question. I think subject to what the immigration standards are and everything, there's like you have the OPT. If you're an international student, you have an OPT, right, which is the 1 year get to do work in the US, and then if your employer likes you, then they can give you an H-1B. I think Accenture does provide sponsorship opportunities, but I would say probably would be limited to specific roles, talents, skills that you might have. So if you're an international student, I will be upfront, you have an even harder, bigger hurdles to come up against, right? Where you've got to be able to demonstrate like why you, who is an international student, can do a job that no other US citizen can do, right? I mean, I think it's the law says something to that effect, right? Which is crazy, right? But so what I would say is, think about what are the skills that are in high demand nowadays. And it's, again, like I said, it's pretty like open in terms of like the workforce needs everyone. But things that in consulting that are really important, that are really, really in high demand are data and analytics, everything digital, like digital marketing, digital strategy, digital everything is like just hugely important. So what I would do is like brush up on some of the terminology, brush up on the latest and greatest thinking there, see like what you might have to offer that others might not. Okay. And then that could help you get your foot in the door where it's like, hey, you're an international student, you want to get hired by Accenture, you have the skills, Accenture, you should hire me as my OPT and then H-1B overall to get, ultimately sponsorship if you decide to do that. Option B, Accenture being a company that operates in 120 different countries, there is a likelihood that if your country of citizenship might also have Accenture offices. You could also apply for a job. Let's say you are from Spain. We have Accenture offices in Barcelona, in Madrid, and a few other places within Spain, or even in Europe more broadly too, that you could apply for those jobs in those different regions too. Or if you're in the Middle East, we've got a big presence in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, with satellite offices in a few different countries in the Gulf too, and Saudi Arabia too. So you might also consider like joining Accenture through those offices too. It's all one company still, especially if you're in the commercial space. It is very much a global company. You can then transfer over to, if you wanted to go to the US and things like that. Again, I will tell you, it's not guaranteed and it's difficult to transfer. Even for me, like when I did a project in the Middle East for a year through Accenture. It was pretty rare and uncommon for someone to be able to do that nowadays, because we do have presence like in the Middle East already with people who know the market and everything too. So, you've got to keep trying. Again, like I said, you've got to fail fast. But, as an international student, I would say, working for a global firm, you would have your option A of like finding, H-1B route in the US, or option B in your country of citizenship, or you could also consider.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of different visa options too. If you go out of the country for a few years and come back in, it's like you said, it's not guaranteed and it's probably not easy, but it is an option to look into other countries as well.
Yeah. I think there's also, and finally I figured out how to open up the questions here. So there's a lot of federal projects at Accenture which require clearance. Yes, there are a lot in DC. So if you're looking in DC, a good chunk of our book of business, like all of our sales and projects, in DC are Accenture Federal Services. So when you're looking at Accenture, the careers.accenture.com page, you have AFS, which is called Accenture Federal Services, and that's the one that's going to require the clearance. That's the one that's probably going to require citizenship and all. I would encourage you to look at Accenture LLP, Limited Liability Partnership, which is the commercial branch of Accenture, where you wouldn't be doing the federal projects overall, right? In DC, again, in DC, there are fewer. There's more. DC is the exception where you have more federal than less commercial. Globally, you have a lot more commercial and less federal, though. So if you're limited to DC, you've got to try it's slimmer pickings. Yeah, it's slimmer pickings in DC. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds great. If there, anybody have any other additional questions?
There is another question around encouraging international students to apply for internships. Is there a possibility they will be hired? Yes. You should check with the International Student Services Office, or maybe Joe. I don't know if your team does this too, but again, because Accenture does pay their interns, that I think is considered employment,
Yes.
your compensation. So if you're an F1, I think it's F1, right? The student visa, if you're on a student visa, I don't think you're allowed to actually work for money. So you should consult with the International Student Services or the Career Center and see like what that means from your visa perspective. But from an Accenture perspective, yes, we do. We could give internships to international students, and is there a possibility they would be hired? Absolutely. I think that it might actually make it easier for you in terms of like, people, you've been on projects, you did great work, and this is why you should be hired, and this is why we should give you an H-1B or whatever it is overall too. So if you can work out that first step of how do you work out your visa.
Absolutely, and I think that all our international students definitely should check out the International Student Services Office and really understand the CPT and the OPT. I think that's really critical and crucial when they want to make themselves more competitive and get those opportunities and those volunteer opportunities to build their resumes. So yes, thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't think there are. Other questions? No open questions. Thank you so very much, George, for being with us today. And thank you for everybody in our audience. If you need any help, we can reach out to George. He's willing to talk to you. He has his email, I believe, in the chat box. Did you put your email in the chat box?
My LinkedIn page.
In the chat box. Reach out to him. Ask him questions. Don't ask him directly for a job. Do that. But he's willing to give his advice. I mean, on how to get involved with Accenture, with Booz Allen Hamilton. Really his life experience. There are so many alumni that can be reached out to utilizing LinkedIn. I think that everybody should have a LinkedIn page. If you need any help with that, definitely come into the Center for Career Development. And if anybody needs to make an appointment for anybody in our office, you can go to Handshake, where you'll find jobs posted there, as well as ways to make an appointment with one of our staff members. So thank you very much again, Georges, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Best of luck, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
You too.
Bye now.